This is 5 on 20 News, where the news is chilling, but the newscasters are white hot.
I'm Rich Gary.
And I'm Joel Foster.
It's Friday, February 24th, and we're coming to you live from our studio in downtown Tucson. First, let's look at local headlines.
The Arizona Senate approved a bill on Wednesday that makes it a felony to participate or help organize a protest that leads to a riot. Republican lawmakers say that hitting these individuals with criminal racketeering charges is needed to crack down on violent protesters. Under SB 1142, protesters can be charged even if they don't participate in the riots. All 17 Senate Republicans voted to support the bill, while all Democrats voted no. The bill, which was introduced by Republican Sonny Borelli, will now move to the House. In addition to criminal charges, prosecutors would be able to seize assets as well. Senator Martin Quezada, a Democrat from Phoenix, says that the law unravels efforts to reform the criminal justice system and says that it will have a chilling effect on free speech. Democrat Steve Farley says that the law is a total perversion of the RICO process, which is the system that allows asset seizure. He sees major constitutional issues down the line. Remember the name Sonny Borelli, people. The creator of this monstrosity was convicted of domestic abuse for punching his wife 3 times in the face in 2001, and he's up for re-election in 2020.
Federal officials have arrested 5 people who were previously freed from Phoenix jails after Sheriff Paul Pinzone shortened detention times. Under the rule, Pinzone's office gives federal agents 5 to 8 hours to notice before immigrants charged with state crimes are released. In that time period, federal agents can arrest the individuals who are generally charged for immigration-related crimes. Pinzone says that this is not something he wants to do, but he is required to do under federal law. ICE used to have to give up to 2 days when an individual would be held, so they now have less time to make the arrest. But this might be less of a challenge if Donald Trump gets his way and is able to add thousands of new ICE agents. A memo released by Trump this week instructed federal agents to target a larger group of undocumented immigrants that under the Obama administration, in addition to adding a ton of new ICE agents. The memo also seeks to bring 287G law back into play. 287G law allows local law enforcement to target immigration-related crimes. While Maricopa County officials have said that the new ruling won't affect how law enforcement does their job, it's going to be tough to ignore pressure from the federal government. Maybe they can just claim they didn't hear about it.
NPR studied efforts to teach English language learners in all 50 U.S. states, and Arizona fell in dead last, by a lot. The study aimed to show how difficult school can be for students who speak English as a second language, and how this contributes to failures in our education system. NPR measured the amount of English language learners graduating high school versus the total graduation rate. While some states, such as West Virginia, Arkansas, and Iowa, have largely closed the gap, this was not the case for Arizona. It had the lowest level of English language learners graduating high school compared with the total number, with only 18% of ELL students graduating high school. This is much lower than the 75% of students overall that graduate high school in Arizona. We were over 10% lower than the next lowest state, Nevada. The numbers show a vast achievement gap still exists within the Arizona school system and that there's a lack of effective programs to teach students English. In all states, ELL programs are often underfunded and some are non-existent because people generally don't support these types of programs. But the study also shows that strong ELL programs increase the graduation rate overall and make it more likely that these students will go on to receive a college education. But I guess it's just easier to try and kick them out of the country.
Representative Martha McSally faced a series of tough questions at a town hall held in Sahuarita yesterday. About 250 people showed up to the 90-minute town hall, which was scheduled after McSally canceled a similar event in Tucson. Hundreds of people were not let inside, including a group of protesters who pressed up against the glass doors at Good Shepherd United Church, yelling, "We're still here." At an event, McSally was asked about Trump's presidency, which she called, quote, a bumpy rollout. She also denied Trump's claims that the media is the enemy of the American people. In related news, dozens of protesters marched in Gold Canyon after Representative Paul Gosier canceled a town hall event that was scheduled there. He changed the event to a telephone town hall where he conducted in his underwear on his couch.
The Arizona House has given initial approval to move forward proposals that would allow lawmakers to repeal or change voter referendums. The proposal was put forward after Republican legislators were disappointed with the passing of Prop 206, which raised the state's minimum wage. Two other proposals related to voter initiatives were delayed. One proposal by Representative Don Shooter of Yuma would require 10% of voters in each legislative district to sign petitions for a particular referendum. This would, in theory, make it more difficult to get an initiative on the ballot, which kind of seems to be the point. Another proposal by Representative Vince Leach would ban paying petition circulators, which is a common practice to gather support for voter referendums. Democrats say that these proposals are an assault on voters' rights to make their own laws. Shooter was a pretty straight shooter when it came to his reasoning over the proposals. He said that voter-led initiatives were becoming a testing ground for liberal idiocy, but didn't seem to understand that voters supported Prop 206. That's kind of how these things work.
An Arizona candidate for governor is taking transparency to a whole new level. One many would say is an unwanted level. Noah Dyer is running as a long shot campaign to be the Democratic challenger against Governor Doug Ducey. Dyer is a former teacher who is calling himself a moderate. He believes in repaying state debt, equal education opportunities, and he is supportive of gun rights. But his most passionate views are those related to openness and honesty in government, and he's proving this in an original way. On his campaign website, Dyer outlined any sketchy issues from his past under the heading Scandals and Controversy. In the section, Dyer talks about his student loan debt, his divorce, his period of homelessness, and most interestingly, his busy sexual history. It says that, quote, Noah has had both deep and casual sexual relationships with all kinds of women. It goes on to say that he's an advocate of open relationships and that he's had group sex with married women, and he's sent and received intimate texts and pictures, occasionally recorded videos during sex. Ball's in your court, Ducey. Dyer insists that even though his campaign didn't want him to include this section, he thinks that people want honesty in politicians, and this was his way of proving it. In response, Ducey has begun posting pictures on his website of him trying on S&M gear, and he plans to write a blog post about that time he got a half chub while talking to Ann Coulter about cutting food stamps.
And I wanted to take a moment to talk to you about the program you're watching right now. Here at 5 on 20, we're undertaking a new kind of citizen journalism. We're going to give you the news as we see it. And we want more people to speak up with us. We need writers, hosts, anchors, camera people, sound people, the whole gamut. The times require a new way of informing ourselves. So join us. Do it. Do it now. Email us at info@creativetucson.org to get involved. And if you think there's a story we're missing, a person we should interview, an upcoming event we should cover, or have any news tips for us, shoot an email to us at info@creativetucson.org. We're here for you, and we want to cover all stories from all points of view. So please don't be a stranger. Now, in national and international news.
Press Secretary Sean Spicer says that the federal government will be stepping up efforts to crack down on states that legalized recreational marijuana in the United States. While marijuana is legal in 7 states and Washington, D.C., it's still considered illegal by the federal government. President Obama gives a 2015 directive that the government wouldn't interfere with states that legalize the drug. On the campaign trail, Donald Trump said that it should be left up to the states, although he thought that marijuana was, quote, bad. However, it looks like he changed his tune. Spice says that he does believe there will be greater enforcement of recreational marijuana in his daily press briefing. He went on to link marijuana to use of harder drugs such as painkillers and opiates, referring to such scientific studies as He brought up the nation's opiate problem, but he provided no solutions to the very real problem, instead using this as an excuse to crack down on marijuana. Massachusetts, Nevada, Maine, and California were the newest states to be a part of the legal weed club. It's worth mentioning that none of these states went for Trump in the last election, nor have any of these states, nor have any of the states that have legalized marijuana. This comes a day after the Trump administration rescinded protections for transgender students, arguing that it should be up to the states to decide. After the decision, Sean Spicer said that the president is a big believer in states' rights. Come on, you guys. You could have at least waited a week so it wasn't so obvious. Tomorrow, Trump is set to announce the executive action that would ban states from their own slogans and force them to adopt the phrase, "Make, insert state here, great again."
Catchy. Attorney General Jeff Sessions is reviving a program that would allow the federal government to use private prisons. President Obama ended the program 6 months ago after repeated criticisms related to human rights violations. Sessions said that the rule impaired the Bureau's ability to meet the future needs of the federal correctional system. And of course, share prices for private prison companies rose after Sessions sent out his memo. CoreCivic, formerly Corrections Corporation of America, their stock rose 3.7%, and the GEO Group stock rose 1.5% after the news broke. Since Trump's election, CoreCivic's stock has risen by over 98%, while GEO Group's has soared over 136%. Well, at least someone's winning these days. But it clearly isn't undocumented immigrants who are the target of a recent memo released by the Trump administration ordering quick deportations, many without a court hearing. For the immigrants who aren't lucky to be deported, they'll be put into prisons. Guess who's going to be running the prisons? Last year, private prisons housed about 22,000 people, mostly accused of violating immigration laws, at a cost to taxpayers of about $600 million. Sally Yates, the former attorney general who was fired for challenging Trump's Muslim ban, had been a harsh critic towards the private prison industry. In a memo based on research on the industry, she concluded that they didn't provide the same level of correctional services, programs, and resources as traditional prisons. She also found that they do not save costs, which is a common claim by their supporters. The private prison industry fought back, claiming that's the only place where you can get the bargain of 2.5 square meals and hepatitis all in your own 16 square foot room.
It appears as though the swamp is being drained and replaced with a pool of toxic waste. The Center for Public Integrity has revealed that the same billionaires and corporations that Trump criticized on his campaign trail bankrolled the Trump transition. Their study found that the nonprofit formed to handle the transition raised about $6.5 million in contributions, mostly from corporate interest, lobbyists, and private billionaires. While Trump's inauguration committee banned money from lobbyists, it was fair game for his transition committee. One such example was Ballard Partners, a lobbyist group run by Brian Ballard. He contributed the maximum of $5,000 and then registered to lobby more money from Amazon, American Airlines, U.S. Sugar Corporation. Not surprisingly, the private prison company, the GEO Group, also contributed the maximum $5,000 amount. A good investment considering this week's events. Other examples were lobbyists for the American Beverage Corporation, 21st Century Fox, Google, Chevron, and Altria, the tobacco company formerly known as Philip Morris. Sound bad? We're not done yet. The transition team also received funding from the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers, the American Medical Association, the American Petroleum Institute, the Mortgage Bankers Association. Okay, I think you get the point. Pretty much everyone looking for favors from Trump. One notable admission, Goldman Sachs, who didn't contribute because they're already in the White House, so why bother?
Hooray! America made its first arrest of a terrorist since Donald Trump became president. But don't celebrate so fast, it's a bit sketchy. Media reported the arrest of 25-year-old Missouri man Robert Lorenzo Hester in a plot to carry out an ISIS-inspired attack. What they don't mention is that Hester was set up in a sting operation by the FBI and that Hester never actually had any contact with a member of ISIS. It began when the FBI noticed Hester making anti-American comments in a group called the Lion Guard. Agents were suspicious because the name Lion is usually connected with Middle Eastern terrorist groups. But as Hester later explained to the undercover agent, it was named after the children's cartoon of the same name. Regardless, the undercover agent asked Hester if he wanted to carry out an attack on President's Day, and Hester said he was, quote, up for it. They instructed him to buy 9-volt batteries, duct tape, roofing nails, and copper wire, but Hester wasn't able to pay for it, so the agents had to give him money. Hester said he would pay them back when he got his tax returns back. When he bought the supplies, the agents opened their truck to reveal a supply of decoy rifles. Hester was arrested a few days later and charged with providing material support to a terrorist organization. After this constructed plot, there isn't any evidence that Hester intended to carry out a terrorist plot if it weren't for those oh-so-helpful FBI agents. It's not as though Hester was an angel, as he did have a history of arrest for petty crimes, but there's nothing to suggest that he is a terrorist. All they have evidence for is that Hester had written messages such as "Burn in Hell, FBI," and posted flags of terrorist groups on his Facebook page, although the FBI didn't reveal which groups there were. Hester had been enlisted in the U.S. Army until he was discharged in 2013. Agents also noted that Hester continued to smoke marijuana even though he called himself a devout Muslim. Think about this next time that you hear the phrase "material support for a terrorist group," because I think we're going to hear it a lot over the next 4 years.
An early draft of the Trumpsters' budget plan shows that the administration is looking to cut funding for millions of Americans who are victims of domestic violence, veterans in need, disabled, and families facing foreclosure. The draft was circulated over the weekend and called for the elimination of Legal Services Corporation, or LSC, which has a budget of $375 million, or about 20 trips to Mar-a-Lago for Trump. The LSC provides legal assistance to low-income people on cases involving disability, benefits, disaster relief, elder abuse, fair pay, wheelchair access, low-income tax credits, unlawful eviction, child support, and much more. Basically, anyone who needs help in this country. Other programs targeted for elimination in the budget draft was the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which provides funding for NPR, the National Endowments for the Arts and Humanities. The draft also looks to eliminate AmeriCorps, the popular volunteer program that sends young people to work in the same inner cities that Trump mentions in his tweets. Guess he'll send the feds instead. The cut in the LSC comes at the same time when the Trump administration is looking to ease enforcements for cases involving domestic violence and violations in disability laws. This will likely create a demand for cases involving the LSC. Rebecca Kuckwalter-Poza of the Center of American Progress said that she's gotten an indication that there will be cuts for grants aimed at domestic violence cases. Oh, but the budget wasn't all cuts. It seeks to add 10,000 more customs and immigration agents to handle Trump's immigration crackdown. And don't forget that big, beautiful wall, which needs to be paid for somehow and won't be out of Trump's pocket. One idea floating around the Republican circles is applying a tax to every 9/11 domestic violence call, which would raise a cool $100 million, according to the Republican strategist Chris Brown.
Hundreds of Palestinians will have their homes destroyed because of a road planned to be built by Israel connecting East and West Jerusalem. The route, dubbed the American Road, had been planned for over a decade but only recently moved forward, partly because of support from the Trump administration. In order for the road to be built, at least 12 Palestinian neighborhoods will be leveled, as Israel will confiscate about 300 acres of land. Construction has already begun in the Salah neighborhood of the Jabal el-Mukabir region. The confiscated area amounts to about 57 homes, which houses about 500 Palestinians. Defenders say the construction will raise property values in an area that is generally poor. For Palestinians, this represents a further encroachment into their land by Israel. Trump said 2 weeks ago that expanding Israeli settlements aren't a good way to establish peace in the region, but he stopped short of calling for a cease in building new settlements. While Israel says that the road is built for both sides, Palestinian claims that it's for Israel only. They point out that the plan will get rid of all the roads that connect Palestinian neighborhoods to Jerusalem. An Israeli spokesman said that Palestinians are welcome in Jerusalem, but they'll just have to walk, which is great exercise.
This was Richard Aguirre. No? Excuse me. And newsflash, Trump has banned the New York Times, BuzzFeed News, CNN, the Los Angeles Times, and Politico from attending White House press briefings So much for free speech.
Just in.
Now, this was Rich Gary.
And Joel Foster for 5 on 20 News.
Next up, Joel gives us the rundown on recent media maelstrom.
All right, welcome to This Week in Mediocrity, where we present you with all the best in the worst of the media. I'm your host, Joel Foster, and this has officially been the longest month in our nation's history. Our Commander-in-Chief has trumped up his attacks on the media, developing a hate that's only met by his dislike for Rosie O'Donnell, Kristen Stewart, and pretty much any woman who wants to be treated as a human being. Because as we know, the media represents the thing Trump hates most, telling the truth. It continued today when it was reported that the New York Times, Politico, BBC, and CNN were not allowed into the press secretary Sean Spicer's daily press briefing. But it's not about who was kept out, but who was left in. Conservative sites such as Fox News, Breitbart, The Washington Times, and One America News Network were allowed to pass through the whitest, dullest velvet rope imaginable. This comes after it was reported last week that Gateway Pundit, a site that is to news what Mr. T is to music. I didn't know much about Gateway Pundit, so I spent the last week checking out what they had to say. And they revealed a troubling trend in these kinds of sites, which is painting Muslims as dangerous to our society. Here's one example. Gateway Pundit wrote a story about a Saudi Arabian couple from Corpus Christi, Texas, who left his kid in a car for 45 minutes while they saw a movie. According to the story, the police didn't charge the man because of cultural reasons, and that it's normal behavior in Saudi society. Of course, the comments boards lit up with people furious of how this guy wasn't held to American law, and how this is an example of how Sharia law is creeping forward and will soon take over our legal system. But something struck me funny about the story. This happened in Corpus Christi, Texas. After all, not a place where you think Muslim tolerance. It might have been maybe a bit more believable if it was in LA or Boston or New York, but this is Texas, a place where they've turned racism into an art form. So what was the real story? Okay, well, it turns out the local news ran a correction days after the original story ran, even before Gateway Pundit took the original story and ran with it. In the correction, the Corpus Christi police says that the police spokesman was wrong about the reasons for why the couple was not charged, and that the police department is investigating the case. But Gateway Pundit must have forgot to include this bit. But it's just one example of how Muslim culture is misrepresented by the media. And sometimes it doesn't even need to be Muslims, but people we think are Muslims because of their headwear. For example, Sikhs, a religious organization originating in India. A religion originating in India are often mistaken for Muslims, even though they don't identify with being Muslim or Hindu. When we see a guy wearing a turban like this is a Sikh we're talking about, not a Muslim. But this hasn't kept our media from misidentifying them. We might not have noticed, but they have. The Times of India outlined various articles in the US media about the Muslim ban that use pictures of Sikhs to illustrate their point. I get that we might not think it's a big deal, but confusing Sikh headwear with Muslims is like comparing the Pope's hat to a Pastafarian colander. But it isn't just a little mistake in the media, it has real effects. For example, a naked man who was high on meth broke into a Sikh temple last March in Washington. Looking around, he saw religious symbols and thought that he discovered an ISIS hideout. He was caught on camera picking 2 swords off the wall and then began to trash the place. Besides being probably the funniest security footage ever recorded, it's also a dangerous example of what happens when people misunderstand others' faith, especially when they're high on meth. So you'd think the Sikhs would be pissed off, right? People incorrectly stereotyping their religion. So let's listen to a robotic woman tell us how angry they got.
Sikh temples opened doors to Lake Oroville evacuees. Members of the Northern California Sikh community gave Lake Oroville evacuees what they needed most over the past few days: a place to stay. "We announced that if anybody needs help, medical help, or anything, we are open," said Ranjit Singh, the manager of the Gurdwara Sahib Sikh temple in West Sacramento, California. Singh had said his temple has 2 large halls that can sleep about 400 people. "People started to come here Sunday night and more than 200 people were here," he said. "There were about 100 people at the temple on Tuesday. We have so many from Sikh community, and white community, and the Black and Mexican communities also," he said.
That's right, they're so angry that the Sikhs are housing people impacted by the Lake Oroville dam break in California, most of them white people. But what are they really up to? It's obviously a recruitment tool used as a psyops operation by the Islamists and globalists. We've got the documents to prove it. But to get back to the Gateway Pundit, as I said before, I'm up for different types of media. But it's no better to have all liberal media than to have all conservative media. We want different, not opposed media systems. Sites like Gateway Pundit don't give you accurate views on Muslims and Sikhs, people who often we don't meet. So we have to rely on these sources for our information on who Muslims and Sikhs are. So the best solution I can give you is get out there and meet Muslims, Sikhs, and all the rest. They're in your community, whether you know it or not. Attend one of their events, volunteer to help out. It's much better news than you're ever going to get from Gateway Pundit. Thanks for watching. I'm Joel Foster, and I'll see you next week. Have a great weekend.